The year is 479 BCE. The sea near Salamis shimmers under a bruised sky, but the water isn't blue. It's streaked black, thick with ash and oil. Charred planks drift aimlessly, bumping into broken shields and splintered oars. Every wave drags away the remnants of a fleet that once seemed unstoppable. The Persian navy, once the terror of the Aegean, is gone, burned, scattered, defeated. That's what the poets will say, of course, that Greece triumphed, that the gods favored Athens, that the tides turned that day to save democracy itself. But the beach tells another story. Listen carefully, and beneath the gulls and the crash of surf, you'll hear something no bard would ever set to verse. Screaming, not the fierce, roaring kind that shakes battlefields. This sound is thin and endless, the kind that comes only from throats rubbed raw with fear. Up in the hills, smoke rises from a sea of tents, thousands of them, fluttering like ghostly sails. They stretch for miles, an empire of canvas and despair. Inside those tents are not soldiers, not spoils of victory in the way history prefers to imagine. Inside are women, thousands of them. They are the daughters of Athens, Corinth, Thebes, Megara, women who hid their children in cellars and cisterns as their cities burned, women who believed the worst was already behind them. They were wrong, because they survived. And for Xerxes, survival was never mercy. It was a tool. The months that followed the Persian retreat would not be sung about in marble halls or carved into temple walls. Yet they are preserved in the bones unearthed near Sardis, in clay tablets cataloguing deliveries, in the whispered lines of Greek epitaphs no one bothered to translate for centuries. What happened to these women wasn't enslavement, not in the way textbooks sanitize the word. It was something far more deliberate. It was an attempt to erase a civilization from the inside out. You can still trace it if you know where to look. The records of inventory in Persian archives, the notes of birth and lineage, the administrative seals that reduced human lives to data. The question isn't whether you can bear to hear this story. The question is, will you dare to remember them when the rest of the world chose to forget? Because history, as we are told it, loves its heroes. It loves its battles, but it rarely loves the women left behind in the ruins. So let's return to that beach, not to celebrate victory, but to uncover what victory cost. To understand what came next, you have to understand Xerxes, not just the king but the empire he commanded. Persia didn't merely conquer by force, it conquered through a system, ruthless, efficient, and centuries ahead of its time. It was called the harem system. But the word harem deceives. Forget the later fantasies of silken couches and perfumed halls. In Xerxes' world, it wasn't about pleasure, it was about control. When his army swept into Greece in 480 BCE, it brought more than 500,000 men. But among them were not just soldiers, there were scribes, registrars, and slavers. Their job wasn't to fight, their job was to count, to record, to process. And what they recorded was chillingly precise. Every city taken, every island subdued, every woman deemed suitable for integration. Because Xerxes knew something most conquerors didn't. You don't destroy a nation by killing its men. You destroy it by taking its daughters and making sure their children forget where they came from. By the time Persia's retreat began, after Salamis and Plataea, more than 40,000 Greek women and children had been absorbed into the Persian administrative network. 40,000 human beings, listed as cargo, not citizens. Most were sent east to places like Sardis or Susa. Some became domestic laborers, but the most beautiful, the youngest, the daughters of nobles, those were reserved for the royal harem, not for desire but for assimilation. Their new purpose was terrifying in its simplicity, to breed loyalty, to erase lineage, to turn enemies into Persians. On the shores near Athens at Phaleron, the machinery of this system grinds into motion. The Persians call it bariftan, the taking of yield. Rows of Greek captives stand barefoot in the sand, the smell of smoke still clinging to their hair. The men are separated first, those still alive, that is. The women and girls are led to a separate enclosure, where Persian officials wait with clay tablets and styluses. One man oversees the operation, Artabazus, a name found stamped on seals and echoed in Herodotus's records. His gaze is not on the horizon, where his fleet burns, but on the captives before him. A girl is pulled from the line, perhaps 16, her dress torn, her eyes hollow. Her mother screams, and a soldier silences her with the back of his hand. He doesn't kill her, that's not the point. She needs to watch. They all do, because terror, too, is part of the process. The girl is led into a tent. Inside, a Persian scribe sits cross-legged before a low table. Without looking at her face, he studies her teeth, her hands, the scars on her arms. He writes age, height, condition, notes of purity. She is being catalogued. These are not warriors, these are clerks, but their styluses wound deeper than swords ever could. A surviving administrative tablet from Persepolis lists a shipment like this. Delivered to Susa, 120 Greek females, ages 14-22, sorted and prepared for royal service from Athens, Thebes, and Corinth. Condition: acceptable. Acceptable. That's all they were. And yet what followed wasn't chaos. It was policy. A system refined through conquest. The Persians had learned a hard lesson from earlier wars. A woman taken too quickly resists. She remembers her name, her gods, her home. So before integration, they broke her. Not with whips, but with silence. Not by death, but by erasing everything that made her who she was. In the ruins of Corinth, a stone inscription, fragmented but legible, tells us of one survivor. Her name was Cleis, daughter of Nicodemus. She was 13 when they took her. She returned decades later, gray-haired, and left this message at a temple in Olympia. I was Cleis, daughter of Nicodemus. They gave me a new name. I will not speak. I have forgotten the hymns my mother taught me. Let this stone remember for me. 16 years of silence carved into stone. That isn't slavery, that's cultural annihilation. The camps where women like Cleis were held weren't prisons, they were re-education centers. Girls were taught Persian language, customs, posture, etiquette. Resistance brought starvation. Compliance earned slightly better food. The ones who refused completely were never seen again. In 1958, archaeologists uncovered a mass grave near Sardis, 300 women, all dated to the early 5th century BCE. Their bones bore marks of starvation, fractures, and blunt trauma. But one detail stood out. Nearly all the skulls faced west, toward Greece. Even in death, they were trying to go home. By late 479 BCE, the first convoys of captives reached Susa, the empire's beating heart. Imagine being a girl from a small Greek village stepping into that glittering alien world. Columns taller than any temple, perfumed gardens blooming with flowers without Greek names, air heavy with spice and smoke. And at the center, the royal complex, the harem. Forget everything Hollywood ever taught you about harems. This was not a paradise of pleasure. It was an instrument of governance. According to the Persepolis fortification tablets, documents preserved only because Alexander's fire baked them solid, women entering the harem were ranked. Servants at the bottom, concubines above, and at the top, those chosen to bear noble children, not for passion, for policy. Their children would grow up Persian. They would speak the language of their fathers. They would rule the territories their mothers once called home. That is how empires last, not by swords, but by generations. A Babylonian record from 477 BCE mentions a girl named Thalia, 15 years old. She refused integration. Her punishment: reassignment to the palace weaving halls, 14-hour shifts, isolation, starvation. 8 months later, she died. The cause neatly noted: exhaustion. But some women survived the system, and in surviving became part of it. From the dry sands of Bactria, archaeologists uncovered a letter from a woman named Roxane, a Greek name meaning bright. It was addressed to her sister back in Thessaly. I am well. I have learned the prayers. The steward has taken me as a secondary wife. I have borne him a son. He has your eyes, but he will never know your name. Please do not seek me. I am not who I was. She was alive, but she was gone. Her son would grow up Persian. He would pray to Persian gods. He would never know that his mother once sang Greek lullabies, And that was the true genius and horror of Xerxes' plan. Massacres breed martyrs, but assimilation breeds silence. By the mid-5th century BCE, thousands of children born to Greek mothers were serving Persia as scribes, governors, soldiers, loyal not to Greece but to the empire that stole their mothers. Greece thought it had won, but Xerxes had already ensured that part of it would live on inside his empire. Speaking Persian, worshipping foreign gods, forgetting where it began. And yet, not all the daughters of Hellas were lost forever. Some survived long enough to tell their stories, or at least leave their shadows behind. Rome never rested, and neither did its master. By the time Augustus crossed into his later years, the city was unrecognizable from the marble dream he had promised. The Republic's bones had been buried, its spirit embalmed within the rituals of empire. But beneath the polished surface, behind every statue, every triumphal arch, there was unease. Rome had grown vast, but brittle. The empire worked, yes, but only as long as one man kept breathing. Augustus had built a machine that revolved entirely around himself, and he knew it. Every senator, every general, every poet who praised him, each existed because he allowed it. Even love, even family, became matters of policy. His daughter Julia, the bright and rebellious child of his earlier marriage, became his deepest wound. Married off first to his friend Marcellus, then to his loyal general Agrippa, and finally to his stepson Tiberius, she was used like a treaty. Her body traded for stability. But Julia, spirited and sharp, refused to live as a shadow in her father's system. She mocked the morality laws he had written. She laughed at the image of piety he had forced upon Rome. When whispers reached the Palatine Hill that she met lovers under the moonlight at the Forum, Augustus's rage was not merely paternal, it was imperial. He had crafted laws against adultery to restore virtue to Rome. And now his own daughter had become its living scandal. He banished her to the barren island of Pandateria, where waves battered the rocks like punishment. In the eyes of the emperor, she was already dead. Rome watched and learned. If blood could not protect Julia, then no one was safe. As the years passed, the emperor's eyes turned inward. His power was absolute, but his peace was gone. Every whisper of conspiracy seemed louder. Every face around him looked a little less loyal. He surrounded himself with Praetorian guards, the elite of the elite, men sworn not to Rome, but to Augustus himself. It was a paradox he could never escape. To preserve his legacy, he had to control everything. But the tighter he gripped, the more human warmth slipped through his fingers. Agrippa was gone. Maecenas, his old ally, was gone. Even Livia, his brilliant and calculating wife, seemed more like a silent partner in rulership than a companion in old age. And then there was Tiberius, his reluctant heir. Tiberius had never wanted the throne, nor the life that came with it. He was a soldier, not a dreamer. His loyalty was to order, not glory. Yet Augustus saw in him the only vessel strong enough to hold the empire after his death. When Tiberius withdrew to Rhodes in self-imposed exile, Augustus fumed. He flees his duty, he told the Senate, but deep down, he understood. The empire devoured everyone who touched it. In his private diaries, Augustus began to write less about Rome's triumphs and more about its fragility. He knew that marble cracked and that memory faded. He feared that after his death, the empire might unravel just as easily as it had been built. So he crafted a final illusion. Before he died, he ordered his achievements, the res gestae divi Augusti, to be inscribed on bronze tablets and set before his mausoleum. It was the emperor's last decree, that history should remember not the blood, not the betrayals, not the exiles or the fear, but the glory. He listed every building, every victory, every coin minted in his name, a monument not to truth, but to control. It was propaganda, carved into eternity. When Augustus finally died in 14 CE, Livia was at his side. Rome wept, or pretended to. His last words, according to legend, were almost theatrical. "Have I played my part well? Then applaud as I exit." It was the final performance of a man who had turned politics into theater. Outside, the city stood silent. Marble and gold gleamed under the sun, but something essential had been lost. The Republic's last heartbeat had stopped long ago. Tiberius ascended the throne, grim and dutiful. The Senate hailed him as Augustus's equal, but everyone knew he was stepping into another man's shadow. The machinery of empire still worked, but it worked for no one's glory now. In time, that machinery would crush many more. It would turn senators into servants, generals into suspects, and emperors into gods or monsters. But for now, as Augustus's ashes settled in his mausoleum, the empire exhaled. Rome had a god, a ruler, and a myth, all bound into one man, and that myth would not die easily. Rome had always worshipped memory. From triumphal arches to temple friezes, from coins to marble busts, the empire's greatest weapon was not its legions, it was remembrance. To be remembered was to live forever. But Rome also invented the opposite of immortality, damnatio memoriae, the condemnation of memory. It was the empire's cruelest punishment, worse than death. For when a Roman name was erased, it was as if the person had never existed. Their statues were defaced, inscriptions chiseled out, their faces hammered into oblivion. Even the gods, it seemed, were ordered to forget them. The practice began quietly. A senator who betrayed the emperor, a general who reached too far, a relative who fell from favor. But as the empire matured and paranoia hardened into policy, it became an instrument of control. When Caligula, the mad emperor, was murdered by his own guards, the Senate voted to erase him from all records. When Nero's palace was looted and his ashes scattered, the people cheered as his name was scratched off every stone. When Domitian fell to the blades of his servants, his portraits were ripped from walls, his face gouged out of frescoes. Each erasure was a public ritual of forgetting, yet the more names Rome tried to destroy, the more it seemed to remember them. The paradox was exquisite. By condemning memory, Rome ensured that the condemned could never truly vanish. Messalina, Agrippina, Sejanus, Nero, Commodus. Their stories lingered in whispers, in gossip, in the spaces where inscriptions once stood. Absence became its own monument. Historians centuries later would find statues with only the outlines of faces, where a chisel had erased the eyes, the lips, the nose, leaving behind a ghostly void. And that void would speak louder than the marble ever could. For every act of destruction was also a confession that Rome feared its own reflection. Augustus had taught the empire how to craft memory. His descendants learned how to weaponize it. To remember was no longer a civic duty. It was an act of loyalty. To forget was an order. Temples were rebuilt, oaths rewritten, coins reminted with new faces. The empire itself became a palimpsest, endlessly overwriting its own story. Yet, even as Rome erased, it could not cleanse itself. The same streets where statues once stood bore the scars of removal, chipped plinths, hollow niches, broken inscriptions. They were wounds in stone, and through them, later generations would see what Rome tried to hide, that beneath its grandeur, it was terrified of truth. 2,000 years later, those scars remain. Archaeologists brush dust from shattered busts, scholars trace erased inscriptions letter by letter, and through those absences, we glimpse the outlines of human pride, vengeance, and fear. Damnatio memoriae failed, not because Rome lacked power, but because memory does not obey power. It belongs to those who tell the story next. Today, when we speak of Messalina, Nero, or Domitian, we are defying Rome's own decree. Their names survived the hammer and chisel. Their crimes, their passions, their downfalls, all endure, precisely because someone tried to erase them. In this way, Rome's attempt to silence its ghosts only made them immortal. So when we walk among the ruins and see the empty spaces where emperors once stood, we are not looking at history forgotten. We are looking at history remembered through forgetting. Every erased face, every broken name is a reminder. Power may shape memory, but it can never own it. The empire learned too late, a modern historian wrote, that erasure is the most enduring form of remembrance. And so it is. Rome's ghosts still whisper, from marble fragments, from dust, from the silence of its fallen gods. Damnatio Memoriae may have been meant to destroy them, but in the end, it only ensured that we would never stop speaking their names.